back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm Thomas Goldkamp here with Blake Alderman. Blake, it's been a little bit since our last episode of the podcast. We kind of talked about Billy Napier's hire at Florida, some of our initial reactions to that. The dust has kind of had a little bit of time to settle at this point, so I think it's a good point to circle back around. Blake, recruiting is obviously the number one focus, I think, right now with the early signing period coming up on December 15th. Billy Napier at his introductory press conference made it pretty clear that he's going to be patient and deliberate with his approach in recruiting, and he's not going to sign guys in this early signing period just to sign them. So I guess first things first, Blake, there's been a couple recent changes in Florida's class. 2 decommitments, the big one obviously being quarterback Nick Evers, who is a guy I think a lot of Gator fans really liked because he kind of recruited in this 2022 class for Florida, was very, very pro-UF. And then obviously the other one was 4-star receiver CJ Smith. So Blake, can you fill us in a little bit on maybe why these decommitments are happening and give us maybe the lay of the land when it comes to recruiting right now?
Well, with CJ Smith, Chandler Smith, that's what he's listed on his 24/7 sports profile, the 4-star wide receiver from there in the Orlando area. He committed to Florida back in June, took an official visit there. But, after the coaching change happened, he was kind of monitoring things, seeing what was going on. As of, last night when he opened things up, there had been very minimal and if much at all contact with the new coaching staff and Coach Napier. With signing day coming up next week, it's kind of crunch time for these guys. So he wanted to run track and play football, both at the same, in college. That was really important to him. This is a 10-200 meter dash guy. I mean, he's a speedy type of guy. Wanted to do both of those sports. Very important, like I said. Just the fact of really not hearing from the coaching staff. I think that right now, like you hit the nail on the head, Coach Napier is being very methodical. Not only is he evaluating the targets that were Florida's, on Florida's board previously, but he's also evaluating a lot of the commitments. Mm-hmm. Chandler Smith, hadn't really been hearing consistently from Coach Napier. He took an official visit to Tennessee this past weekend. It seems like they're going to be a school that's, at least that's who I'm keeping an eye on because they are talking about, having him be able to run track and play football. Just kind of coming up with that fresh visit there. With Nick Evers, that's a little bit of a surprise to me. He had an in-home visit. Well, I guess they met by the school. Either way, in-home visit with, Coach Napier on Tuesday. The parents were both there, talked to him about kind of the plan for things going on, kind of mapping things out because, he had Ryan O'Hara, who I know we'll get into later on staff hires, but he's going to be an offensive analyst who's going to deal with quarterbacks because, Coach Napier is going to be the QB coach. He's going to be the play caller. He's going to be the head coach. So he's going to be kind of the brains of that operation as far as quarterbacks and offense goes. Meeting with those guys, I had heard coming out of that visit, that, things went fairly well, that, I didn't hear any kind of type of concerns, as far as the decommitment coming, fresh out of that into the evening, talking to, kind of getting the mindset for what Coach Napier wants to do with the program, how his vision is with things. And then I get a text, close to 11:15 that night, kind of giving me a heads up on that. It was kind of a shock to me just because you've seen Nick Evers be really vocal on recruiting for Florida, kind of being that, I know I said before we started recording, they're kind of like the first family of the Florida 2022 class with how vocal of them have been, as far as Florida and recruiting and all those types of things. But interestingly, I was told that, during that meeting that, Coach Napier, one of the big reasons for Evers opening things up was because, he wanted to be the one quarterback in this class. He wanted to be the only guy they recruited. It seems like possibly that Napier's looking for maybe a guy of his own. I don't think this is a situation where Nick Evers was dropped, but I think this is one of those things to where he wanted to be the one guy in the class and, wanted to be the guy, to lead that class as far as playing the quarterback because there is only one ball. You can only have one quarterback on the field. There's only one ball. So I'm interested to see how things play out going forward. I haven't really heard any type of quarterback board piecing things together. I know there's been a little bit of buzz on Walker Howard, the LSU commit who lives in Lafayette. He was Napier's first offer, Napier was Walker's first offer. Whenever he was a recruit, he landed that offer from Louisiana Lafayette, a guy in his backyard. Heard they have a good relationship. I know that Walker is expected to visit LSU this weekend. So I think that's something to monitor. Could it be a portal guy? Could you see some new offers go out? That's kind of the questions I have right now as I kind of collect things together and look into things. But, that's what we've got coming out of those 2 decommitments from Florida's class.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, both with recruiting and kind of what Napier's plan is and coaching. And I think right now, if you're reading the message boards, if you're on Twitter, I think, Blake, it's safe to say there's a fair bit of angst, maybe frustration. How much of that do you think is just a product of maybe the uncertainty, right? Like Billy Napier told us, we need to be patient, and he's going to be very deliberate with his approach. How much is Florida fans maybe one kind of buying into Evers early on as the guy that was kind of the centerpiece of that 2022 class, and you kind of have a healthy respect for guys like that, versus just maybe not knowing exactly what the plan is going forward from here?
I think it could be a little bit of both. Obviously uncertainty it makes people feel unsettling. Change is hard for people, and you're seeing change from a new regime coming over. And like you said in Billy Napier's introductory press conference, he said things are going to be, have to be patient. They're going to evaluate things. You hear how methodical he is with everything. I've even had some of the guys in the 2022 class say that, Napier had wanted them to send him a video of them working out. So not only is he evaluating guys target wise going forward, but he's also doing his homework on the guys that are in the class. So, I think that, the uncertainty is certainly one thing, because you're, a week away from the early signing period. You don't have a quarterback in the class. So, that's obviously unsettling, and you have guys that you have committed in the class, and fans are, it's short for fanatic. They're fans
right.
of guys that are going to be future Gators. They're fans of guys that, Florida, they're going to be wearing the orange and blue. So, and you have a guy that's really recruited heavily for Florida. He's been very vocal, and a guy, you always have some kind of fondness for a guy that's going to be a Gator. You see fans that are fond of guys that are going to be in the class. They do their homework, they do their research on them, they watch their film, so there's a lot of things there. I think right now, you see a lot of the guys in the class, Florida sitting at 9 commitments right now. And I believe last time I looked, that was 58 or 59th in the team rankings. So, I think that fans in general, they wanted to see a mad dash for the signing day. They wanted to see some guys get added in there. I think it's tough whenever you have a guy that was literally introduced the Sunday before, the week of the early signing period. So you're really trying to mend relationships. There's uncertainty on, former coaching staff members that are going to be there that built relationships with these guys for more than just the last year. Some of these guys have been recruited by Mullen and them from whenever they were, first hired, or, early on in the recruiting process for some of these guys. So the uncertainty, I think there also, you expected, Florida to reach out to some of the commitments that haven't heard from Napier yet. You'd expect, some of the guys, you didn't expect to not have a quarterback commit, heading into this hire with Billy Napier, whenever he was first announced on Sunday. So I think right now, where you just see a lot of the guys that are, leaving the class right now, there's a lot of change, and change is hard. So I think that's what's making things tough, especially whenever there's always excitement whenever the early signing period comes. I've seen guys that, take off work for the day so they can read and see who Florida signs, so there's a lot of excitement there. We do. We definitely appreciate that. But, at this point, you see a lot of guys that have been in this class for a while, guys that, you've followed along with, you've watched their film, you've kind of talked yourself into, what this guy is going to do at Florida. And, whenever you have something happen like this so close to signing day, I can get the angst there, but, I have to say you have to be patient. You have to, I guess, see how the process goes, just because everyone just needs to evaluate what's going on forward. Is there a method to the madness here? In a couple of years, will things work out, with, seeing how some of the guys that Billy Napier adds, or maybe adds in February for the, the national signing day, the second signing day. So at this point, I'm in evaluation mode. I'm seeing how things work out, because, you just don't know what's going to happen, so I guess, I don't know if that really answered your question. I feel like I kind of rambled on there, but for me, I think it's going to be a slow moving process as he figures out what's in the class and what guys that he wants. What guys does Billy Napier see as Billy Napier type of guys?
Right. And I think it does. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that is tough is, with the last 2 coaches, recruiting has very obviously been an issue. And I think one of the selling points for Billy Napier coming in, when the administration's trying to pitch him to the fans, so to speak, after they've made their decision, is, one, he can organize a great staff. He's supposed to be very detailed and meticulous. But 2, he's supposed to be a really good recruiter. The whole idea is you give him the resources, he's going to be able to come in and really start to get Florida on that Alabama, Georgia level of recruiting. And the reality is that's not going to happen overnight. The flip side is the optics right now, Blake, are pretty bad when you have, already kind of a class that before these 2 decommitments was ranked dead last in the SEC. You only had 11 guys. Now you lose 2 of the guys that, at least on paper, are ranked pretty highly. There's kind of this sense that, already we're seeing signs that maybe, some people, I don't want to say we, because I don't feel this way at all, but some people I think are seeing signs that it's like, oh no, here we go again. And I think Florida fans are just so beaten down after really the last 3 coaches, and kind of it's happened in different ways. Will Muschamp obviously was a good recruiter, but the last 2 coaches weren't. And so, yeah, there's going to be a higher focus, I think, from the fans on recruiting. I think the key point is, those changes don't happen overnight. And then the other thing is, wherever this class may end up ranked, it's not going to be good. But the difference is, comparing it historically is maybe not quite apples to apples in the sense that, the transfer portal exists in a way now that it didn't 5 years ago.
True.
And so I do think there's an argument to be made for Napier's approach in terms of being patient and not signing guys just to sign guys. Don't waste initial counters taking guys just to fill a class when you'll have more time after this early signing period to evaluate some transfers that you can get in that can help immediately. And then you can take, in my opinion, a really big class in 2023, what you would typically consider that bump class for a coach. And I think that's where you really focus on those evals. That's where you really want to start to see big time 4-star, 5-star guys, top 150 types, top 100 types, start to kind of, see the vision playing out at Florida. And that's where you build it. Blake, I guess real quickly before we kind of shift to the coaching staff, what is this staff's goal right now before the early signing period? And I know that's a tricky answer because we're still continuing to build sources with the new coaching staff. What is your take on kind of how they're approaching the next week or two, particularly with, official visits this weekend?
At one point I had a lot of guys on the official visit weekend list, guys that were committed to Florida. Some of those guys haven't heard from the coaching staff. There's still some uncertainty. So, I've kind of cut some guys back on the official visit list. And that's not to say that they won't officially visit. It's just I'm kind of waiting to see what's going on because it does seem like a very slow, methodical moving process because you've got the week of where, Coach Billy Napier is on the road seeing a lot of kids. Some of the assistants are either with them or seeing guys on their own. So at this point, I'm kind of seeing who they see, who's signing in December, because you would think that those are kind of the top guys that they're going after. Whenever you've got a guy that's signing in a week, you have to build relationships quick. Will they work out? You never really know. But at this point, he's kind of kicking the tires on those guys. He's seen some of the commits in the class. Obviously he's been talking to some of them he hasn't been talking to. So those are kind of the things that I'm keeping an eye on because I do think there's still a lot of things to play out, even though it's, we're hitting the midweek part of the week. But I'm kind of waiting to see who hears from Coach Napier, who doesn't, where do they go see guys? And as I continue to build the official visitor list right now, as far as I know it, there is a tab on Swamp 24/7. If you go to the recruiting tab and drop down to official visits, there are guys that I have put on there for the official visit list. And that's guys that have told me that they'll be officially visiting this weekend. So I'm kind of waiting to see how things play out there. This weekend could be, where, like I said, I thought it was going to be a pretty big weekend. It could be a very small weekend, where guys coming in, it could be a fairly, I don't want to say quiet early signing period, but, at this point, you've got 9 commitments in the class, 2 guys from the class that recently backed away from things. Like I said, he's got guys that are sending him film of them working out. Some guys that haven't heard from him. So, there's some uncertainty there. So could there be more attrition from the class? I mean, if you don't hear from a coach in a couple of days, heading into signing period, I certainly think there could be, but I still think there's things to play out because at 11 a.m. on Wednesday morning, could he have not heard from Coach Napier yet, but, could a guy have heard from him later in the afternoon or on Thursday or things like that? So I do think there's still things to play out. So I do think there's some patience that needs to be implemented here as you see how things play out, because again, I do think it's going to be a slow moving process. And I know that that's hard for people because you think the week before early signing period, you think it's like the mad dash to the finish and, things are all over the place and, you're going a million miles an hour. And not to say that I'm not going a million miles an hour in a million different directions, but there are things where I need to check on things to see what's going on. You've got a guy that you may visit today. You got guys like Francois Knowlton, the defensive end commit from down in Miami, the 3-star offensive lineman, Jalen Farmer, guys like that who have told me already that they don't plan to sign until February. You're still filling out a coaching staff here. So there's still relationships that need to be rebuilt. You have a guy like Shamar James, the former Florida commit, the 4-star linebacker, was visited by Billy Napier on Tuesday evening. He was at one point thinking about visiting Florida this weekend for an official visit. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Is that uncertainty from the former coaching staff being gone, that there's relationships being built? I think Alabama and Georgia are in a really good spot there. Some of these guys that I've already covered on the site, mapping out the recruiting visits and, kind of catching up with the guys that, do visit with the coaching staff and getting their thoughts on how things went and what the vision is that Coach Napier is planning them out for. It's weird because it is like a thing where a million things are going on, but it does seem like a very slow moving process to where he's not only evaluating the targets and seeing those guys and guys that he wants to, pursue, but he's also kind of evaluating that commitment list, seeing guys that fit his mold, what he wants to do. So it's kind of a getting to know thing, an introductory process, not only for the targets that you're trying to sign, but the guys who've been committed in the class as well.
And I think it's a little bit unconventional, right? Because for a lot of coaches that take over, a week, 2 weeks before that early signing period, it is a mad rush to the finish. And I think it's a little bit of an unconventional approach to basically do what Billy Napier is doing and say, hey, we're not going to take guys. Don't expect a big class on the early signing period. My sense is they may not even send out a whole lot of NLIs for guys to sign. So it's definitely an interesting approach. And guys, if you think, Blake has been doing a lot on the site on Swamp 24/7, and he certainly has. He has been all over recruiting. You guys cannot imagine the amount of hours he's putting in behind the scenes to work on building a network of sources and really just tracking down and vetting a lot of this info. So, Blake, I wanted to publicly thank you on the show for that, because I know it has been absolutely hectic, really for the last couple of weeks, but especially for you in this quote unquote not mad rush to the finish. So let's take a quick
slow moving mad rush.
The slow moving mad rush. There it is. Let's take a quick commercial break, Blake, and then when we come back on the other side, we'll touch a little bit more on the staffing front, because obviously that's also a big piece to this in terms of you got to have your staff in place for a lot of these guys to feel comfortable signing in the first place. So right after this commercial break, we'll be back. Welcome back to the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I'm Thomas Goldkamp, here with recruiting guru Blake Alderman. Blake, I know there's been a lot to cover. Recruiting, obviously, is your focus. Coaching staff, maybe a little bit more my focus as far as how Billy Napier is constructing his staff. So I think for people that may not be on the Swamp 24/7 message boards, what I want to do is quickly outline some of the hires that have happened. Running backs coach Jabbar Jalouk coming over from Louisiana, and then co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach Patrick Toney. Those are the two hires as far as on-field guys that have been made official. I don't know that they will be the last hires from the ULL program. They're still working towards a bowl game there. But I think it's safe to say there probably won't be a ton of on-field staffers that come over from UL. This is a job, obviously, Blake, where Florida is capable of attracting some big-time assistants. With Billy Napier's time that he's spent at Alabama, at some of these other places, he has a lot of guys that he's had coaching crossover with who may get a chance to come here to Florida. But Blake, like recruiting, the staffing so far has been kind of a similar story. Billy Napier's got 2 guys in that are helping him right now with some of these visits and stuff like that. But for the most part, I think there's going to be a little bit of a waiting period for some of these other coaching hires to take place. Blake, in no small part, that is, to me, because of how many head coaching openings there are this cycle. There's just a lot of guys out there that are going to be weighing multiple opportunities, and I think Florida's going to have to let that play out to a certain degree.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You've got things playing out with coaching guys. Even if you go to the NFL, that season's obviously longer than the bowl season. There's just a lot of wait and see right now, and I think that's tough for a lot of fans too, because you want to get that coaching staff filled out. You want to see who's going to be the guy. You want to, see how the initial staff is going to play out, because it's important to have guys that you trust, guys that are going to do a good job, coaching, recruiting, all those types of things. And, whenever you have a guy like Napier that comes in, with a tab of being a really good recruiter coming in from, where he's at Bama, he's, obviously worked under Nick Saban, and Clemson, where he's worked under Dabo Swinney, both schools that have traditionally recruited really well. And, several recent years here, Bama obviously has been recruiting well for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. But, you've got those guys coming in. So you really want to give Napier and the guys that have been on the trail now some help. So, we'll see how things play out right now. I know that you want to bring some of those guys from, that you're familiar with, like a Coach Jalouk from Louisiana Lafayette, and obviously Coach Toney, who's kind of known as an up and coming type of coach, young guy that's going to
31.
really kind of infuse things, and pair him with another co-defensive coordinator. We'll see how that plays out there. So, you still have some things to fill out. So I'm interested to see how this coaching staff does fill out, because again, that initial coaching staff is very important. Obviously we'll see how things change, if things work, things don't work in the future, but you want to have solid footing for sure whenever you have that first staff in there.
And I think the important thing to remember too is again, I go back to this Billy Napier hire in a lot of ways was about getting somebody in there that can sort of modernize Florida, right? And get them to the place where Alabama and Georgia are as far as program infrastructure. And I think one of the important things about staffing to point out, Blake, is that Florida has upped its assistant coaching pool, salary pool by quite a bit. Billy Napier was given $7.5 million to work with for his 10 on-the-field assistants. Jalouk and Toney, as young guys, kind of up-and-comers, probably not going to command towards the higher end of the salary range we've seen at Florida over the last couple of years. I mean, Todd Grantham was making $1.8 million a year. So you take that into account. I think the Gators have the money to really attract some of these big name prospects. But Blake, the other thing that's interesting and I think is worth talking about is the $5 million piece that Billy Napier has been allocated for some of these support staff roles. And I think it's very clear that Billy Napier plans to aggressively expand kind of the entire department there, from player personnel to
which is great.
All of that stuff. It's long overdue at Florida and probably doesn't get talked about enough. I know we talk about Florida has been behind in facilities for a while, and the $85 million facility will help there. But the infrastructure at Florida, while it has improved, still isn't as big as some of these other places. And big doesn't necessarily mean good. You still have to have direction. Like the overall number of people kind of working behind the scenes improved under Dan Mullen's tenure. But I always felt like there wasn't really a clear direction necessarily. And so that's going to be what's interesting to watch from Billy Napier. I think the other cool thing about Napier, at least to me, that I like is because he's got such a broad, big staff, and this was true even at Louisiana, he ends up hiring a lot of young, hungry guys who are out ready to prove themselves, right? And to me, that is one way to really ensure that you always have a group that is pushing forward, is trying to, push the envelope. And one of the things, Blake, this seems probably minor to a lot of people. Florida never really, that I can recall, ever really publicized or pushed off the field hires, right? In terms of the PR arm. It was one of those things where like we would kind of have to check and see, did they hire this guy? Did they add him? What kind of role is he doing? And that was kind of like behind the scenes reporting for us. Well, so far under Billy Napier, they have been very quick to kind of publicly put out press releases on some of these behind the scenes not PR, but behind the scenes QC, quality control type people, support staff hires, in a way that, to me, that speaks to Billy Napier's overall vision of everybody in the program, everybody associated with the program is all in on helping this thing have success. And so I think when you talk to people that are familiar with Billy Napier, and I've spent a lot of time talking to sources before he was hired and after he's been hired at Florida, the thing that a lot of people point to is Billy Napier is the same guy with the quality control staffer that's making $40,000 as he is with his most highly paid assistant coach. He's a very genuine guy. And it's funny, I think a lot of Florida fans are almost don't know what to do with some of the comments about being patient and we're not going to sign a lot of guys on early signing day because they're so unused to having a Florida coach that just kind of tells them like, it is how it is. You know what I mean?
Transparency. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, like, this guy would actually probably admit to you that he saw the band walking into the stadium. So there's a little bit of a cognitive disconnect there where I think fans are like, wait, what? But really, I think...
What does it mean?
Yeah, and I think this is a completely random note. I'm sure most people won't think twice of it. But to put out PR press releases on guys who typically would be afterthoughts in college football speaks to, I think, the culture and the vision that Billy Napier wants to push. Blake, a couple of those guys real quick. Mark Hockey has been hired as the strength and conditioning, the head of strength and conditioning. We don't know exactly yet which guys may or may not be kind of retained from the previous staff. It does sound like all of the on-field assistant coaches from Dan Mullen's staff will no longer be on-field coaches under Billy Napier. And to me, Blake, I think that's a good thing. There are certain coaches you can make a case for. I think Christian Robinson is one that personally I think I could easily be fine with Christian Robinson staying around. I think players love him. I think he's a really good recruiter. I think he's probably even a better recruiter than his results under Dan Mullen have shown.
And he fits that very humble, good person type of feel. That
humble, good person, hungry.
Type of what it seems like Napier's trying to build in those offices.
But I think from a bigger picture standpoint, Blake, one of the things I like about Napier's approach so far is it does not seem like he's going to be the type that is worried about sort of how things are perceived from the outside. I think he's going to root out some of the old culture issues, root and stem. And that starts with bringing in your guys and making sure that everybody has bought into it. Because it's human nature to, if you're retained as an assistant coach, to want to kind of relate to your players and kind of present their side of things. But you can run into some chemistry issues there. So I don't personally have a problem with Billy Napier assembling his staff and everything. We'll see how the hires shake out. You certainly want to get high-level names, and you don't want to be missing on guys that you're targeting that maybe go, to a Mario Cristobal staff or something like that. But Blake, I got to say, I'm impressed with the approach in some of the simple things that Billy Napier's done in terms of staffing, and we'll see where these hires go. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. But to me, emphasizing those roles that typically are viewed as less important speaks volumes to me.
Yeah, those are the guys that, are the behind the scenes guys, the guys in the recruiting offices. I think that, kind of highlighting those guys, before you'd have a guy that was hired at Florida in the recruiting offices and, you really didn't know that he was hired until he, updated his Twitter profile or, updated his bio or, something to that effect, had some kind of update on social media. So you're seeing that, recruiting is important. They're making it part of the infrastructure. I personally like that you're seeing, or at least hearing that, it's going to be a pretty big office because, again, that's something that I think Florida has been lacking. And, putting the effort into that and making that part of, the infrastructure of the program, I think that, again, that's things we were hearing that was important whenever Billy Napier was negotiating things when coming to Florida. And I think that whenever you have, at a school like Florida, again, the money that previously have been spending on recruiting, it's a lot of money to you or me or, a fan listening to this podcast, but it's not a lot of money compared to, the Georgias, the Alabamas. Right. If you want to recruit against those guys, yes, you need to win those battles on the field, and pitching things and building relationships and closing recruiting out and, really kind of being a dog on the trail. Those are all extremely important. And I'm not trying to downplay those things, but if you have an army of guys in that recruiting office compared to some of these other schools, and you're just working with, maybe, I don't know if I'm going to get the number right, but maybe 7, 8, 10 guys in there, that's not going to cut it compared to wherever you've got different guys in different roles at a school like Georgia or Alabama. You need to be able, if you want to compete with those schools, not only do you need to do all those things recruiting wise that I said, but you need to have the resources, the people in there, the manpower, all those things are extremely important. And I think Napier putting an emphasis on that, and Florida agreeing to do an emphasis on that, and having more, money pooling for, facilities like they're doing, and having more money towards recruiting and those types of things. Those are the things that are going to help you. Yes, as a facility, having a standalone facility for a kid to come see, that has, recording booths and a lazy river and all those type of waterfalls and cool things. Yes, those are good because those are what other schools have. That's how you keep up with the Joneses. But those aren't things that are going to land kids. You can go in there and you can show them those things, and you can say that, we have this, we have that, these resources for you, we have tutoring, we have all these things there. But being able to identify those guys and build those relationships, because the way recruiting works, those guys in the recruiting offices, they're the ones who start out building those relationships. They identify film. They bring those to the coaches, yes or no on an offer. And then you see a coach kind of take over and really become the main recruiter, position, area coach, whatever it may be. But those guys in the recruiting offices, you have more eyes that are able to watch film. You have more guys that are able to talk to recruits and kind of start things off and continue to build those relationships after a coach steps in. Just having more manpower there are literally no negatives to that. And that's something that's been long overdue for Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only negative, if there was one, would be if you have too many guys and
too many cooks in the kitchen type of thing.
That can happen, but as long as the direction is clear and the vision is
organization
clear,
is there, it's important in a recruiting office,
and the organizational structure. That's exactly right. Is as long as that's in place, there's having more resources can only be a positive. Like, I guess the last thing I wanted to say on the coaching hires, because I know that people are a little bit frustrated that there hasn't been more news, particularly people that subscribe to sites like Swamp 24/7. They're kind of, wanting to know what's going on. I think I would not be surprised if there wasn't a whole lot of assistant coaching news before this early signing period. I do think the period after the early signing period until about January 8th or so is going to be really, really interesting to watch from the standpoint of, like you talked about, NFL coaches that Florida appears to be targeting, having their seasons come to a close, and then also the transfer portal. I think a lot of fans right now, going back to the recruiting thing, are focused on kind of seeing some results. They want to see some early results. I don't know that we're going to see much of that in the next week. I think it's going to be the 3 weeks or so after that where you're going to start to see more of the vision kind of play out, where you get a couple more assistant coaching hires. It looks maybe more like what probably a lot of fans envisioned happening when Billy Napier was hired. But I think the timeline that Billy Napier laid out in his initial press conference is going to hold pretty accurate. I think he was telling you the truth. He pretty bluntly told you his plan, his process, and now it's just a matter of watching it play out. And so don't be a prisoner to the moment. I think, these recruiting classes, transition classes, are never very good. I think you can just as easily hurt yourself by taking too many guys just to take them, rather than kind of, having a very process-oriented vision and then kind of going from there. But Blake, I'll leave it at that. I know you've got a ton to get to with recruiting. I've got a phone call that just came in that I got to get to. So that'll do it for today's episode of the podcast, guys. We appreciate you tuning in.